Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving headfirst into the fascinating and honestly pretty intense world of the early Christian church. We're going to be looking at all this through the lens of Warren W. Wiersbe's renowned commentary on the biblical book of 1 Peter. Now look, we all face adversity in our lives, right? But today we're going to explore exactly how these early believers managed to find what they called a living hope while facing absolutely intense, life-threatening persecution.
The commentary actually opens with this really brilliant anecdote. Picture this. Experts had gathered from all over the world to debate what makes the Christian faith completely unique among all the world religions, and they're arguing back and forth, getting absolutely nowhere. Then, the renowned thinker C.S. Lewis strolled into the room, heard all the shouting, and asked what the rumpus was about. When they told him, he just simply replied, "Oh, that's easy. It's grace." And after thinking about it for a second, the whole room completely agreed. But what does that actually mean in practice?
Well, in this explainer, we're going to objectively unpack the insights from Warren W. Wiersbe's text, which is aptly titled, Be Hopeful. We'll be looking at his theological breakdown of how this very concept, grace, acts as an anchor for believers, literally keeping them steady through the fiercest of trials.
So, the commentary defines grace very precisely. It's God's unmerited favor. Essentially, it's a gift given completely free of charge, with absolutely no strings attached, and motivated entirely by unconditional love. To help us understand why Peter wrote about this so passionately, Wiersbe reminds us of Peter's own history. Remember, he famously denied even knowing Jesus 3 times just to save his own skin. Yet, according to the text, instead of anger, Jesus ultimately restored him. That specific experience of unmerited favor became the absolute rock-solid foundation for the living hope Peter would later write about to encourage others.
Okay, so here's our thematic roadmap for today. We'll hit 5 key areas. Number 1, grace as the ultimate differentiator. 2, strangers in the fire. 3, born for eternal glory. 4, staying clean and living holy. And finally, number 5, the power of unity. Let's jump right in.
Starting with Section 1, Grace, the ultimate differentiator.
To really grasp this concept, we need to see how grace completely shifts the way believers view the world around them. In the introduction to the commentary, Ken Bogg highlights 3 foundational truths that believers use to anchor themselves. First up, they view themselves as citizens of heaven, meaning this earth, it's not their true home. Second, Wiersbe notes that God actually uses adversity. He doesn't just waste a hurt, but supernaturally uses it to strengthen faith. And third, they believe the end is near. Earthly time is incredibly short, which means every single action has an eternal echo. Just think about how much that completely rewires a person's day-to-day perspective.
This shift in perspective brilliantly illustrates the stark difference between a secular and a biblical mindset. The text contrasts the super cynical definition of hope by the editor H.L. Mencken, who called it a pathological belief in the occurrence of the impossible, with the Christian definition. Biblical hope isn't just wishful thinking. You're not just crossing your fingers. It is described as a confident assurance of future glory and blessing. It's not some sedative that puts you to sleep in a rocking chair. It's a literal shot of adrenaline that moves you forward on the battlefield. Why does this matter for you and me? Because true hope, as defined here, is a driving, active force, not a passive one.
That brings us to Section 2, Strangers in the Fire.
To truly understand the sheer weight of this hope, we really have to look at what these early believers were actually up against. The commentary grounds Peter's theology in some stark, genuinely dark history. We're looking at a rapid escalation of what Peter called fiery trials, which culminated in the terrifying reign of Roman Emperor Nero around 64 AD. Wiersbe recounts how Nero ruthlessly scapegoated Christians for the burning of Rome. He was throwing believers to lions in the Colosseum for sport, and, this is horrifying, even using them as human torches to light up his evening garden parties. This terrifying crucible is the exact context in which Peter is writing, just a short time before he himself would be martyred.
Because of this, Wiersbe explains that Peter was writing to scattered strangers living across 5 different provinces of the Roman Empire. Because the text frames them as having a heavenly citizenship, they were basically considered resident aliens or pilgrims. They held completely different standards and values from the pagan culture surrounding them, and because of that, they were viewed as exceptionally strange. They faced massive social exile and violent reproach simply for living the way they did.
Moving on to Section 3, Born for eternal glory.
So you're facing lions, human torches, and total social exile. How did the text instruct these scattered strangers to view their suffering? Well, the commentary points out that Peter didn't view suffering as some random accident. He describes it as a refiner's fire. And Wiersbe uses this fascinating analogy here.
An Eastern goldsmith wouldn't just throw precious ore into a furnace and walk away, right? He'd carefully keep the metal in the smelting furnace just long enough to remove the cheap impurities. And how did he know when it was ready? He kept it in the heat until he could see his own face perfectly reflected in the metal.
The crucial takeaway here is that God permits this adversity to test and purify faith. According to Wiersbe's reading of Peter, a faith that cannot be tested is a faith that cannot be trusted. The commentary argues that if someone just abandons their beliefs the second the heat gets turned up, well, it just proves the faith wasn't genuine to begin with. But true, tested faith, Peter considers that to be far more valuable than the purest, most expensive gold on earth. Section 4. Staying clean, living holy. So, if you're a resident alien going through this intense refiner's fire, what is your practical, day-to-day response supposed to be? Wiersbe highlights this incredibly vivid phrase Peter uses: gird up the loins of your mind. Now, think of a robed man in the ancient world. If he needed to run, he had to tuck his long skirts under his belt so he was completely free to move without tripping over himself. Mentally, this means pulling your thoughts together. The text is commanding believers to maintain a disciplined, sober, and wildly optimistic outlook, totally free from worldly distractions or the sheer panic of the culture around them. The big idea here: your outlook determines your outcome. Furthermore, the text heavily emphasizes a concept that Wiersbe notes is, frankly, often misunderstood today: submission. He's very careful to clarify that in this context, submission does not mean subjugation. It doesn't mean slavery. Rather, it means recognizing God's ultimate authority by respecting earthly institutions, like the government, the workplace, and the home. Why? Well, Wiersbe argues that it's because the secular world is constantly watching. By doing good and showing respect even to hostile authorities, believers were instructed to act as a silent but immensely powerful witness to the very people persecuting them.
And finally, Section 5, the power of unity.
When you combine this unmerited grace, the intense refiner's fire of suffering, and a highly disciplined lifestyle, what is the ultimate result? Wiersbe draws out 4 incredibly vivid metaphors from Peter's letter to illustrate Christian togetherness. He notes that believers are described as children born into the exact same family, sharing spiritual DNA. They are living stones, quarried and cemented into the same spiritual building. They're priests serving in the same temple, and citizens of the same heavenly nation. All of these metaphors point to this deeply organic, unbreakable togetherness.
Now, the commentary makes a really beautiful distinction here. This unity, it isn't about some dull, robotic uniformity. As Wiersbe points out, not all children in a family look identical, and not all stones in a building are the exact same shape or size. Actually, it's precisely this diversity that gives the building its beauty and its strength. It is all about harmony amidst differences, standing together as living stones to offer spiritual sacrifices, totally united by their shared grace and their shared trials. To wrap things up, the commentary leaves its readers with a deeply provocative thought. Inspired by a poem from Francis Ridley Havergal, who was looking at a picture of Christ's sacrifice, Wiersbe quotes this haunting question: "I gave my life for thee. What hast thou given for me?" He uses this to invite some deep, personal reflection. When presented with such profound, unmerited grace in the face of life's inevitable fires, how will you respond? It's a question that definitely leaves you wanting to explore these ancient texts even further. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this provided a clear, engaging look into the incredibly powerful themes of 1 Peter.